Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us at our Reinventing Commuting in the Post-COVID Era discussion today. Before we get started, I'll like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. And I know that is in different jurisdictions and different places for all of us. So I will thank and acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation who are in the area that we occupy here in Sydney, and give my regards to their elders past, present and emerging, and wish the same for you in your various different jurisdictions that you're joining us from today. So thank you. I'll also take the time to thank the French Chamber for hosting us today. It's an exciting and relevant topic. The French Embassy also for their contribution, and all the sponsors who work with us on these programs, but especially the named sponsor for today's presentation, which is Schneider Electric. So appreciate their contribution to today. Now, a terrific group of speakers lined up today and panelists with whom we'll be discussing this topic. Joining from France, we have Bernard Tabari from Keolis. And welcome, Bernard. In a moment, we'll hear from each of the speakers. They'll do an introduction to themselves, but we'll just run through those who are presenting. Elizabeth Muldwater is joining us also from the New South Wales Department of Transport. Elizabeth, welcome and thanks for joining us today. And Anouk Pullman from Renault is joining us also today. So some really well-credentialed local and international contributions that we'll be hearing from today. And so I'm excited to get going with that panel. Before we do that, we'll just run firstly through to Anouk to introduce herself, her role, and any other sort of insights that she sees to get us going on the subject matter. Anouk. I think, Anouk, you've just got to jump off mute there, and there we go.
Thank you, James, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Anouk Pullman, and I'm the Managing Director of Renault Australia. I'm also the President of the Victoria Facci chapter. I've spent my working life in the mobility industry, specializing in automotive. In the new normal of a post-COVID world, it means big crowds are highly unlikely, which means the era of cheap air travel for the masses is almost certainly over. That represents a massive mind shift for Australians, who are typically among the most enthusiastic travelers in the world. Travelers will be looking closer to home, and I'm predicting a massive surge in driving holidays. I see proof of that every day in the growing demand for the Renault range of light commercial vehicles, converted into motorhomes and camper vans. RV converters I talk with are currently trying to catch up on hundreds of back orders. The majority of those are first-timers. It makes sense when you consider Australia's love affair with cars. Our ownership rates here are among the highest in the world. SUVs represent the biggest selling segment in Australia, with a combination of safety, versatility, and towing performance. SUVs now account for more than half of all vehicle sales. In a post-COVID world, I can only see that number continuing to grow. It's not just leisure activities where I see transport changing. Australia Post disclosed e-commerce has grown more than 80% in 2020. It is setting a new baseline and means online shopping is already at levels experts were predicting would take 5 years or more to achieve. In effect, I believe we are witnessing a new definition of the term commuting. It is no longer automatic behavior to hop in the car to go shopping or book a flight for a business meeting interstate. We now have confidence we can do those activities online. We are becoming familiar with changes in how we holiday, how we spend more time working from home, and with purchasing what we need. That presents challenges for the decision makers to provide the infrastructure to satisfy this new world. In automotive, we are rapidly approaching the age of electric vehicles, and I'm proud to work for a company that is a pioneer in that field. We have the biggest electric fleet in the world with some 350,000 Renault electric vehicles on the streets worldwide. And Group Renault has this month pledged to halve emissions by 2030 and to achieve zero CO2 impact by 2050. COVID has forced an era of rapid business transformation upon us. Going forward, the way we work, the way we play, and the way we travel will be different.
All right. Well, Anouk, thank you very much for that introduction. And there's some great insights that you've provided as part of that introduction that we will give us opportunity for discussion, certainly. Sure. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, perhaps you could introduce yourself coming from New South Wales Department of Transport and tell us a little bit about what's keeping you active in your thinking around reinventing commuting.
Yeah, thanks, James. I'm Elizabeth Mildwater, Deputy Secretary of Greater Sydney for Transport for New South Wales. Many of the things that Anouk mentioned, we sort of look at from another perspective as well. I think COVID has been, it's sort of trite to say it now, a real disruptor, but in some ways for us, it's accelerated trends that I think we were seeing develop before this. So from the start of COVID, I guess what we've been doing in transport is both being really focused on keeping services going, which in itself was a pretty decent challenge, and different jurisdictions did that in different ways, but we focused on that. But I guess we were also aware of our role in sort of assisting with the recovery, and so bringing a lot of works forward to try and stimulate the economy. But we're now very much turned into the future and looking at some of the trends that Anouk mentioned, and also in particular looking at what the impact on population will be, because transport is an enabler for Greater Sydney and for New South Wales, and so we don't sort of just invent things for ourselves. We have to work out what the economic and social fabric of the state and the city is going to be like post-COVID and then support that. So we're really focused on sort of changes to population and some of the movement call-outs that Anouk just gave us. We're sort of focusing on the same trends and seeing what they mean for our transport system going forward.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. That's a great insight, and I like that. The impact on the population is a different way of looking at some of these challenges and how that then forms up the decision-making process that'll go forward. Now, Bernard, you're joining us from France. Thank you for taking the time. Perhaps you could give an introduction to yourself and any initial thoughts that you might have on the topic.
Good day, James, and thank you for that invitation. Good day all. I'm Bernard Tambry, CEO International of Keolis. Keolis is a public transport operator or a facilitator of mobility, as you would want to call it. We are a group of 68,000 staff, 6.5 billion euros in revenue, and we operate in 15 countries. I'm in charge of everything which is outside of France, and in Australia. We have been established for more than 12 years now in a partnership with Downer, and we operate in New South Wales, in Victoria, in Queensland, and in South Australia, as well as West Australia. Various modes of transport, tramways, buses, ferries, and soon also heavy rail. Our mission again is to help public transport authorities enhance the attractiveness of their communities and their territories through a safe and dependable public transport. And in that regard, COVID has been quite an experience. I'm delighted to be part of this panel and to listen to Anouk's and Elizabeth's perspective and add ours, resting, if you like, on our experience in various parts of the world, be it China, India, Europe, the UK, North America, and of course, Australia. And the motto of the company is really thinking like a passenger, i.e. not so much focusing on the mode of transport, because we see that when people move around, they don't just take one mode, they combine modes. They walk, they take the train, they take the bus, and basically focusing on thinking like a passenger and trying to enhance our approach to daily services that we run through, delivering what passengers are looking for. And that's what I'll be happy to discuss. For us, if you like, transport or mobility goes beyond commuting. Commuting is probably 30 or 40% of what happens on the public transport network, but we see that the usage of the public transport network goes well beyond commuting or the sort of traditional commuting as we knew it. Again, look forward to this discussion with our panel members.
Bernard, thank you for that introduction. Gosh, isn't it interesting the way commuting seems to come up and what it means and how that's differentiated from our traditional beliefs of what commuting has been. Now, one of the things we've seen with restrictions on movement that's been imposed has been massive impact to the airline industry. That is not something that can be easily influenced. However, what we're also seeing is the question of trust being raised by passengers more in a rail, bus use, integration. And so I want to go through perhaps with each of you and just get a sense, maybe we'll start with you, Bernard, on what your observations are, given your global footprint, with usage of public transport. How is it being impacted in different countries? How are they feeling about it? And what any observations you're seeing in those jurisdictions? What are you doing to enhance trust? And does IT play a part in enhancing that trust? So just getting those observations, and then we'll go back through Elizabeth and Anouk and get those more local impacts within the domestic circumstances in Australia.
Yeah, thank you, James. And indeed, we operate, as I said, in several countries in the world. Luckily, we have a significant operation in Shanghai, where in partnership with Shanghai Metro, we operate 2 metro lines and 2 tramway lines. And therefore, very early on, we realized the impact of this crisis and its impact on passengers. Well, today, what is the situation that we observe in Shanghai is that life has come back to normal, i.e. patronage is at 90% of what it was. That's on the metro, 85% on the tramway. The airport metro is only at 50%. That's because international travel is still closed. But really, confidence has come back. Face masks are mandatory on public transport. Passengers are back and back almost to normal numbers. Then we see a variety of countries like in Scandinavia, where we operate in Norway, in Sweden, and in Denmark, where attitudes to social distancing and mask wearing, etc., has been diverse. Overall, we see patronage there that is probably around 70% or 80%, i.e. There also life has come back to close to normal, despite the threat still being strong in Sweden, but people managing, if you like, the environment and the situation rather smoothly. And then we see countries with a lower patronage, and I'd put, At the moment, the UK has dropped down significantly. That's because of the reinforced measures. We see India, where we've only reopened the metro 3 weeks ago, and the metro is at 20% in Hyderabad, where we operate. And then we see a variety of situations in Australia also, with Melbourne, of course, being at roughly 10-15% of patronage, but climbing, and Queensland being close to 80%. So a variety of situations. The good news, or the bad news, is that the perception of passengers is that public transport is not safe, and they, in surveys, rate us in the same category as nightclubs, or at least they used to at the start of the pandemic. A study in France by the health agency showed that only 1.2% of clusters were identified around public transport, i.e. absolutely negligible against parties, family gatherings, and various events. Public transport is safe today with all the measures that are taken. And indeed, our challenge as an operator is to convey that feeling of safety, of dependability, and we do that, of course, through intensive cleaning and very visible cleaning, through very strict measures that are taken, but also through information on that. Information is, everything about the timetables, but there's public transport, like an essential service, has been kept to almost normal schedules around the world. It is a sign of the fact that the city is alive and moving. But we give information on various measures, but also on loading factors on trains or buses, and indications of filling factors, so that people can make their choices. Or even, say, in London, on our trains on the Thameslink, within the train itself, of the loading within the train, so that people can move from one end to the other. Now, with data, and thanks to GPS analysis that we are making, and we've done several studies on that in France, we've observed that commuting is also changed in its, or moving around has changed in its patterns. We have observed, for example, in Paris, a huge increase of walking, and walking, and people, if you like, favoring walking as part of their journey, i.e. avoiding a second connection if they can, and walking as much as they can. We've also observed much quieter Sundays, i.e. people staying at home and probably not having as much social meetings. And at the same time, we have seen that only approximately 1 out of 2 people can work from home, i.e. there's a lot of activities that do not lend themselves to working from home. And our obligation, of course, is to ensure that we serve all communities, those who work from home, but who want to move around a little bit, as well as those who have to go to work because of the nature of their work or the nature of their obligations. And also, health transport, health visits, etc., are an important part of mobility, and this is something that we need to maintain also. So, sorry, long statement.
No, not at all. Thank you. You've covered some good global insights and covered some interesting ground there with the data analytics, and that's interesting. And Elizabeth, I'm going to go to you in a moment and just sort of plug those gaps, because you've got the New South Wales mandate between Melbourne and Queensland, which Bernard was good enough to cover. What, Elizabeth, impacts are you seeing for transport and confidence on transport? I have the benefit of taking the train reasonably frequently in the Sydney system. I do see that high visibility cleaning. I do think it gives confidence, but it feels like the trains are pretty underutilised at the moment. What's the facts around that, and what are we doing in New South Wales to build trust?
Look, it's a fascinating question, James, and many of the things that Bernard discussed are the things that public transport organisations around the world are dealing with. And we share a lot of insights and information too, because a lot of this is now about human behaviour. As you mentioned, and Bernard said as well, all over the world, we are doing incredible amounts of cleaning. in fact, most people here, if they caught a train, you know, there's a good chance they'll actually see a cleaner walking up and down on the train. If they're on a bus, it will pull in somewhere to get cleaned during the day. But we still, as you correctly identify, there are these question marks about people's confidence in public transport. And in fact, what we're hearing from our engagement with large employers, the two sort of, near-term constraints, aside from health orders at the moment, that when the health orders get relaxed, the two constraints that workforces are telling their employers or that they can see they need to work around, one is their confidence in public transport and the other is lift capacity in buildings, because you can only get so many people in a lift at a time. With the public transport confidence, we saw in New South Wales, we saw patronage sort of drop 80% when, you know, sort of the stay-at-home orders were put in place. But it came back up to around just under the 50%. It didn't actually take too long, and it sort of hovered up and down a bit. Our capacity is constrained because we have a green dot system where people should only sit or stand where there are green dots. So at the moment, we're constrained at around the 50% capacity. As you said, you may still get on a train and think there's a lot of spare capacity. It's what we find is it really varies. There are some services that have been at or above the reduced capacity for some time, and then there are others that there's less. So one of the key challenges to us, and I think all public transport authorities, is to get the load spread. While ever our capacity remains constrained by social distancing, we're going to try and influence behaviour to get people to spread out and use the services more evenly throughout the day and indeed the night, which may actually be a feature that we need to take on, you know, for some time into the future. It's something that we were, talking about pre-COVID, getting peak spreading and all the like, but now it's actually really with us as a thing that we have to do. So that's a real key focus for us. We'll be really working on a bit of demand management, I think, working explicitly with employers to shift their start and finish times. Of course, if people continue to stay at home a couple of days a week, that reduces the load on the system as well. But confidence is, I've heard it described as sort of a fickle and fragile thing in this COVID world. We've seen the confidence measured, so we do a lot of surveying and analytics, and confidence seems to drift up and down, not necessarily related to the public transport system itself, but to other things that are happening, as you would expect. So confidence in Sydney started dropping, confidence in public transport started dropping when Melbourne was going into its second lockdown. So they're the sort of trends we see. So yes, it's an exciting challenge and one that I think will take a fair while to overcome. People freely admit it's not about the service itself. It's about more general, how comfortable they feel being around other human beings generally.
Yeah. Look, Elizabeth, some of the things you pointed out there, as an office holder in Barangaroo in Sydney with thousands of staff at PricewaterhouseCoopers with me, we are really facing into that challenge ourselves of how are people going to work? How do they want to work? How do they commute? And so those challenges that you then have to second guess in order to work out what impacted to transport. Are you considering anything you're learning from abroad? Some of the things that Bernard talked about, rethinking commuting, and Nook also talked about that. Talking about walking, talking about other things you're seeing or trends you're seeing abroad that are going into your planning for what commuting means into the future of New South Wales?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things, places such as Paris and London, Amsterdam, of course, had a real jump on Sydney in terms of use of walking and cycling. And we had already, our purpose, quite literally in the division that I run, we have identified in our purpose, integrating transport and providing people with choices, essentially mode shift. We were trying to get people to do more walking and cycling. And so the brilliant thing we've seen about COVID is it's same as what Bernard was describing, a lot of people walking or cycling in their local area. We've been trying to learn from our colleagues overseas. They, as I say, they have been at it for some time, over years, implementing, more active transport type policies. What we're trying to do is actually jumpstart, if I could say that. We were a bit behind in terms of what we had going. So we're trying to use COVID as a bit of a catalyst to get going and learning from places like London and Paris, some of the things they had done in terms of temporary facilities, they had tried some stuff and they continue to, you know, pop-up cycleways is the thing we're really doing in Sydney. But we did learn some of that from overseas, where the lesson we learned from some of the other jurisdictions is you just try some stuff and see what works. You might not get it right all the time, but if you want to make rapid progress, you've got to just start trying some stuff.
Yeah, that's nice, and you know, I think you've got a greater latitude to try, and in certain circumstances readjust or pivot to different outcomes. I feel like the population is forgiving at the moment, more so than they have been historically in some of these sort of ventures, and are interested to give things a go. I know if you try and buy a push bike in New South Wales at the moment, or anywhere in Australia, you go on a waiting list for, you know, was there ever a better time? Look, we're going to talk about cars. I know there seems to be a popular rise in walking and other modes of transport like cycling, which the medical fraternity will be very happy about. But I also occasionally drive to work. I've driven today up to the Central Coast, and it feels to me like a school holiday on the roads, a school holiday period, I mean, where there's probably 25% less motor vehicles on the road. I'm not really caught in any traffic, and it's quite a nice place to be. What are you seeing in road usage, car sales? That sort of indicates, in your introduction, you talked about change of type of motor vehicles, which goes to more domestic tourism. What else are you seeing in the vehicle sales trends that guides your thinking of what commuting might look like in the future?
Yes, thank you. No, again, I think we already talked about human behavior. Human behavior is changing, and I think we touched upon this topic, all of us, from different angles. The same in the car industry. You see that change in behavior as well. I talked about it in my introduction, a new definition of commuting, especially for leisure and pleasure. You were just saying that you saw driving up to the Gold Coast less traffic. It felt like holidays. I always thought that during holidays everybody was on the road. Perhaps it's a little bit less at the moment, but a car, if we talk about trust.
You just stalled there a little bit.
Confidence. If one place, the most trusted environment for any person besides home is being in the car with your loved ones. That is the most trusted environment, isn't it? The usage of a car, what we see is that the usage is perhaps less on a short distance as it is on a long distance. Long distance being for holiday trips. This is where you see the shift happening. People using their car for a long distance travel. Long distance being then holiday travel or holiday trips. What we also see what we have seen in the last 6 months is that, of course, purchases have gone down, but that was also as a result of being in a lockdown. There was no retail at all. It didn't mean that the market went down completely. It's just that people were not allowed for a short period of time to buy any car. But as soon as it was possible again, for example, in June of this year, which was the end of fiscal year, we saw a booming of the car sales, particularly commercial vehicles, particularly SUVs, and we are expecting a similar trend to happen towards the end of this year. Government measures like asset write-off is of course helping. Federal budget measures are helping. What we also see is that people are perhaps holding on to a car a little bit longer, but still keeping a car because it's part of your family life. It's something that you need for your family lifestyle. We also see that as a result of the economic challenges, is that people are looking at, instead of buying a new car, looking to buy a young used car or an older used car.
Okay, so there's some interesting trends going on in car purchasing, and for those people who are joining us from outside of Australia, we have some pretty huge distances to cover off on. And then look, I want to come back a little bit later on. I'll give you some time around the electric vehicle conversation that you flagged in your introduction, and we'll have a look at that. But Bernard, I just want to go back. Keolis, obviously across the world, leading edge. I want to talk about some of that technology. You touched on data analytics earlier, which guides your thinking. How much of a part does that technology play in where you intend to establish new business, and how it impacts upon your analysis for where you see public transport continuing to grow, continuing to be efficient and things like that? So what part does technology play in the decision making at Keolis? And any sort of behind the curtain look at some of the technology you're using there in France?
Yeah, thank you, James. And indeed, well, technology is great news when it comes to public transport and the challenges that we are facing. First of all, talking about the passenger, I guess in yesterday's world, public transport was more of a curse, i.e. you didn't have any alternative and you took your morning train or morning bus and had to bear with it. Today, with your smartphone, you can look at options, and you can see what the options are. And public transport becomes a choice and not a curse. You can decide to ride share, you can decide to cycle, you can decide to walk, you can decide to change the various modes, and you see alternatives popping up. And we were talking about walking being on the rise, and of course cycling also. But as a public transport operator and as PTAs, we have an obligation to serve the entire population. And some people are mobility impaired when it comes to walking or to cycling, and even mobility impaired also when it comes to reading capabilities, understanding capabilities, etc. So that if you like, the very diversity of the population we have to serve is if you like, a challenge that technology helps us meet. And not only are we indeed today a big operator of bicycles, we operate more than 20,000 bikes in France and in a few other countries also, but we develop a lot the mobility on demand. With mobility on demand, you can basically organize public transport in a sort of a rideshare mentality with the permanence of a public transport offer at the cost of a public transport offer and at the cost of delivering of a public transport offer. And Transport for New South Wales has really been very forward moving in running several trials in New South Wales of on-demand transports, and we have run a couple, and there's lots of lessons to learn from that. But it is one of the good sides, if you like, of technology enabling that sort of approach. Now, in the operation itself of the service, and Keolis has been running in the last 4 years over 30 projects of driverless or remote controlled shuttles, and we've carried over 200,000 passengers on such shuttles, and And the good news here is what we have seen last month with the trial that we started in Stockholm in partnership with Intel, with Ericsson, with Telia, the telecommunication operator, of running a autonomous shuttle on 5G. And they're using 5G on communication to do the control of the vehicle, suddenly allows greater levels of safety and of, if you like, control than 4G did. We've been running metros for 40 years, driverless metros in Lille, for example. So we're used to running that type of mode, but the metro is a confined environment, is a one-dimension environment. But running shuttles in open environment, thanks to 5G, allows us to do the remote control with tomorrow. There will be no need to have a, well, today we don't have any driver on board anymore, but we have a staff attending to passengers and being there for safety purposes. Well, that staff for safety purposes will not be needed thanks to 5G the day enough trials have been run, and that will open the door, if you like, to roles of customer interaction and cleaning, etc., and connection with passengers that will be enhanced. So technology is great news, if you like, for the operation of modes, and technology is also great news for collecting data, not only on passengers, but also on equipment. At the moment in Melbourne, our trams are collecting data on, you know, thanks to IoT, the Internet of Things, with captors on the trams, sensors, they can run the whole defaults of a line by the detection of any rail degradations and any troubles, enabling us, if you like, to do preventive maintenance, both on the infrastructure as well as on the rolling stock, which trigger tomorrow, you know, better reliability of the equipment and better service for the passenger. So we have huge challenges to face, such as the pandemic and its impact on daily life, but we also have great helpers, which with the development of technology and the sharing of these experiences, because it is very much a world where we don't rest on just our own achievements and laurels, but we work in partnership with manufacturers, with public transport authorities, with other operators to come up with solutions that serve passengers. Again, long answer. Sorry for that, James.
No, not at all. It actually is it's quite fascinating, and it's a great insight into how technology is assisting making decisions. And it's difficult to talk about commuting going forward. It feels like COVID has really accelerated a lot of where we might have got to anyway, and it's almost been a convenient excuse for exploring those, and that sort of tolerance that I mentioned with Elizabeth for the public sector or the public in general to test and adjust. Elizabeth, I won't talk about the bikes in New South Wales and Sydney, but I am curious as to why that is such a successful model in places like France, where there's bikes and scooters and things for people to sort of jump on and use. And when we had that in Sydney, it felt that culturally there was a misalignment between people's usage of publicly available bikes, rideshare type bikes and things like that. But if you do want to comment on that, then I'm happy to hear it. But otherwise, I'd also like to hear how Department of Transport, how New South Wales government's thinking around, beg your pardon, too many devices open, how New South Wales government's thinking around technology in able to work out what the commuting of the future looks like. And the other point that you raised in your introduction is about changes to population. So how does population movement relocation potentially meet with commuting needs, and how does technology help you make some of those decisions or assist in some of those decisions?
Starting maybe at the end of your question first about population, I guess You probably have, read in the news a lot of discussion about immigration, what COVID has done to immigration, that sort of thing. So the population forecasting is sort of an ongoing thing, and there are various scenarios of what the future might look like. I guess we just follow. There is whole of government modelling that we will follow. But for us, it's not just about the headline numbers. It's about actually we need to get more granular, because it depends on where people will live and then where they want to commute. So we have to be right across that, I guess, as it unfolds over the coming year or so. We're not sort of changing any immediate investment decisions in response to COVID, but you can imagine that perhaps the sort of 3 to 5 year horizon investment decisions that are out there to be made in that time, will be influenced by what we start to see unfolding. So, for example, if less people are travelling, particularly the longer distances, that might change investment in train fleet, that sort of thing. Or if they are doing shorter distances, it might make us focus more on cycling, whatever. So we will follow that. In terms of technology, a lot of the things, again, that Bernard said that are being used in other places are things that we're trying to fast track as well. So even pre-COVID, we had apps out that could tell you the loading on a train in the different carriages. And we sort of, we had that available on the platform, and we're starting to work on it, with the apps. Whereas early days in COVID, we realised we would have to accelerate that really fast. So now you can, in real time, get loading data on most of our modes. And importantly, hopefully people will start to use that to plan their trips. So based on, they will get advice. We're sort of increasing, quite frequently how much proactive information we get to people, so that if they're planning a trip, we might be able to suggest to them, look, if you go half an hour later, based on what we've been seeing, if you go half an hour later tomorrow, you're more likely to have get a seat or have more space. So we're working on a few apps like that. We're also, we have been doing, again, pre-COVID, we were doing travel demand management, working with employers to try and, help them change the patterns of their staff. But I guess one of the things that was striking me even pre-COVID, we did that by having a terrific team of people, and I did it as well. You go out and speak to employers, you get their feedback, that type of thing, but sort of, wow, how do you scale that? And the only answer to that is technology. So we're starting to work on proofs of concept whereby employers can sort of engage with a planning tool themselves and help them, advise their own workforces. And equally, that way we get the data. So we're already starting to get data from employers about their employees' intentions, and in particular, getting data about where they haven't already made choices. So, and there's a lot, we're hearing still from a lot of employers that they haven't yet made the choices and decisions about how to get employees back to work. So we can help. We know then that's a place worth intervening, to work with the employer about influencing their employees' behaviour. So yeah, look, there's endless possibilities. I think it is sort of, as you said, I think we have a bit of permission to try some stuff and go fast, but very exciting. And I think it's really important too that we learn off other jurisdictions, so we don't all try the same stuff, and learn, learn the same lessons, that we keep swapping learnings across the world, so that we're moving together at scale.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the great insights we get from a presentation session like this, hearing from such varied speakers. And I find it fascinating working in the infrastructure space, some of these insights. So that's terrific. And Anouk, electronic vehicles have a real stigma in New South Wales and more broadly in Australia. It's undeserved. I think technology is very much along the pathway. What are you seeing as far as when do you think, just to get straight to, when do you think we'll tip the point of having more electronic vehicles in Australia or selling more electronic vehicles than conventional vehicles? You got a date in mind?
It will take a long time, I think, James, and especially, people tend to forget Australia is a big country. It's bigger than Europe. Electrical vehicles, the best ones, can provide a distance of 500 kilometers, and then you need to recharge. So it would be very, very, very long trips on the road if you were to do that with an electrical vehicle. But definitely in city centers, in metro cities, there's definitely a trend going on. There are discussions. You see, local governments are looking to electrify their fleets more and more. What we also see is that large companies that have a fleet of commercial vehicles delivering goods at homes, delivering products that were ordered via the internet, could they be delivered with electrical vehicles, like large commercial vehicles, smaller sized vans in inner cities being electrical vehicles. So there's definitely a trend in that direction. If I could also say a couple of words about technology and digitalization. So we are very much looking into the customer journey, the process of shopping, selecting, researching your next car on the internet. Could we digitalize that whole process up to the point that a person, rather than walking into several dealerships to make a choice and to select different cars, how much can you digitalize it through technology, that only when you are you made up your mind and you are very serious about that one car that you want to test and to buy, only then do you create that interaction between a physical dealership or sales consultant and the potential customer of that car. So we are post COVID-19, we have realized what was perhaps 6 or 9 months ago totally impossible to believe, that a customer would buy his car on the internet. Today, it's not so unrealistic anymore.
It's interesting. We started the conversation with all of you expressing the view that commuting, may be a different definition as we go forward.
Yes.
And maybe I just ask you, and then I'll go to the others, and just sort of say, what do you see? What's your big bet for the biggest change to commuting as a result of COVID, or just in that future? So what are we going to be doing in 5 years and 10 years very differently from the way in which we've been doing it before COVID in relation to commuting?
Yeah, so being more conscious, think before, as I said in my speech, jumping in that car, how lazy were we pre-COVID? You had to do a shopping and you just jumped in the car and drove to a shopping center and drove back home. Those things have changed. People are more conscious about when and how to use the car. So more, we are comfortable having meetings. You don't need to jump on a plane anymore, interstate, in order to have a meeting with somebody in another state. You can do it via the internet. You can buy your products and your goods via the internet. So people think, are more conscious about when and how they travel with their car and for what purpose.
Yeah, gosh, I smile because you make me feel guilty on a few of those. They ring very true. Elizabeth, what's your big bet into the future? What are we going to be doing differently? What's Department of Transport going to be planning for in the future that just hasn't really been a priority pre-COVID?
I suspect there'll be a few things emerge, but the one that I think is looking pretty solid early is probably similar to what Anouk said, but slightly different. I'm pretty sure this working from home, a couple of days a week is going to stick for a lot of people who've been doing it we're hearing from our staff, but also from all the employers that we interact with, that their staff, although they want to get back in the office, we all miss the human touch and the human contact. Most people would like to go to a mix of working in the office and working from home. And although pre-COVID we all talked about flexibility, I just think it's jump-started like nothing else could. So I actually suspect we'll see a lot more people not commuting a couple of days a week. In time, that may also mean that people move further out of the cities, but certainly staying at home a couple of days a week, I think, is on the cards for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that we haven't touched on it. I think it's a topic for an entirely new topic, but the redistribution of the population to regional areas now that they can effectively work more remotely will have a staggering impact on infrastructure. Anouk talked about charging locations before, but we talk about communication with people being technology enhancements that are going to be necessary as far as the 5G connectivity that is obviously something that Bernard's seeing a lot of in France and in Europe is enhancing. Bernard, what do you see in some of the areas that Keolis is working in that you think are going to be fundamentally different? How's Keolis leaning into change post-COVID, and what is going to be very different for the general commuter of the 5 and 10 year look ahead than they experience in a pre-COVID world?
Oh, thank you, James. Well, the one thing that I see, Elizabeth was pointing out, and Anouk, is the good side of the pandemic is that it gives greater value to the direct social interaction, and being deprived of it for weeks or months, when it disappears as a barrier, makes people realize how precious direct interaction is. And even to conduct business, one realizes that Teams or Zoom, etc., are great, but there is an added element to the direct interaction with people and being able to listen to faint signals, etc. So the good news there is that the shift towards probably more work from home is that we expect some relief, if you like, on the hyper peak, which is very expensive on public transport to size up to. It's a bit like in the telecommunication industry. If you need to have your phone network just for the 31st of December New Year greetings, then it's a big peak. It's expensive, and there I imagine that this very strong peak of the morning and the and the evening on public transport networks will be smoother. Now we do expect, and we see that also in France, but in other cities in Europe, the attractiveness of regional centers, and then the call for mobility in centers that have not been so well served. And there again, on-demand transport is a great tool, if you like, to offer public transport-like features at public transport-like prices, as a complement, of course, to the individual car. And what public transport offers is a balance, if you like, between the various modes of transportation. And I do expect that the combination of change of habits plus the advent of technology will accelerate such trends. So we need to listen to passengers closely to ensure that we are with them and can meet their needs.
Bernard, thank you very much. I like the point there that you made around community and people interacting, and I think it's probably a nice place for us to wrap up today's session. I want to take a moment to thank Anouk Polman from Renault, Bernard Tabari from Keolis, and Elizabeth Mould-Water from the Department of Transport in New South Wales. James Sherrard is my name. I'm a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the infrastructure sector. We'll leave it there for today. You will find a link, those who have joined us, for the session for Q&A, if you follow the link on your screen. thank you all for your contributions today. Thank everybody for joining us.